Thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you all for staying.
Oh, come on, I wouldn't miss this.
All right.
I'm grateful that you are here. It's an honor to be here. I congratulate the honorees, Stephanie DeMattei, Dee Dee Burke, Linda Laverne, some of our courageous public office holders and candidates had to leave. I think it deserves repeating how important it is to support pro-life people who are office holders and who are running for office. In this room, it's very easy to be pro-life in this room. We are all kindred spirits, but out there on the streets of metropolitan New York, it ain't easy. It really isn't. And for Rob Astorino and Mary Ellen Odell and Terrence Murphy, Francis Corcoran, Phil Oliva, people who have stuck their necks out, in this metropolitan area, that's not easy, and we should always remember their courage. I'm grateful to Alan for the invitation to be here and for the selection of the topic. Alan selected the topic, Albany versus the Sanctity of Life. I'm a boy from Albany, and as I'll mention later, I was there in the state legislature in 1970 when the abortion law was passed here in New York. And from 2003 to 2015, I was there every weekend with my mother who was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and I'll mention some more about that. So we have beginning issues and end issues that I've been familiar with for a long time. There's a lot of literature here. One thing I was glad I didn't see was speaker evaluation forms on the title. That's something that always scares me. One of the things that I did in my life pro bono, for 7 years I was an adjunct law professor teaching patent law, first at Hofstra University Law School and then at Fordham University Law School. And they have evaluation forms near the end of the semester, and the students get to evaluate the professor. And one student wrote in her evaluation that if she were told by her doctor that she had only 15 minutes left to live, she would like to spend that entire time in Professor Murnane's class, because it would seem like an eternity. And I said, I'm a boy from Albany, and maybe that's why Alan has me here. If you've ever been to Albany, you know when you're going into Albany, from Rensselaer across the Hudson River, there are all these bridges now. It's, you know, when I was a boy, there wasn't anything like that, but all the kids got to work on these projects, and one of the things I got to do was paint one of the bridges going into the city, very, very high up there.
Wow.
And you say, wow, it was scary. I didn't last long, I'll tell you. So my mother didn't want me doing it, and I didn't listen, so I told my grandmother. You always have to listen to your grandmother. So anyway, I'm up on the bridge one day, and it's all construction rubble down below, no roads going through there yet. I hear this voice while I'm up there, and the voice says, it's a woman's voice, "John Murnane, get off that bridge this instant." I look, and there's my Nana way down there. And she got her pocketbook on her arm, and she's standing in all this rubble. I don't know how she found me. She took 2 buses to get down there. She said, "Get off that bridge this instant." I explained how, you know, it takes ropes and ladders and a crew to get me off, and I can't do it. And she said, "I will pay you what they're paying you not to do that." This was 1972. I said, "They're paying me $8 an hour." She said, "Be very careful." I learned a lot in Albany, and as I said, you know, my dad left when my sister was 2 and I was 4 in 1957, so we were raised by our mother, a single mother. I learned a lot from her, and she had Alzheimer's disease, and I used to think, because of the disease, and you spend a lot of time with your family, of course, especially then, that I learned the most important lessons in life when I was little, in my earliest years, and in her last years. And she always had witticisms and things that made us think. My family was with her a lot as well. When she was still able to get around, I took her to Union College to a football game. My sister's second son was playing football for Union then. And my mother was okay, but she certainly had the disease. And at halftime, they were playing some loud noise, okay? And they were playing Who Let the Dogs Out, okay, during halftime. And my mother had this quizzical look on her face, and she looked around, she said, "Who let the dogs out? I don't see any dogs." I said, "Mom, it's just a song." And she said, "It doesn't sound like music to me." So I learned a great deal from my grandmother and my mother, and now my wife and my daughter are teaching me a lot, believe me, they're telling me now to get going. Okay, so I'm here to talk about two critical issues. The abortion issue as well as physician-assisted suicide. The big push for abortion came in New York in 1970. And since then, of course, throughout the country, we've had more than 55 million abortions. So many in New York that New York Magazine, which is certainly not a pro-life instrument, has called New York the abortion capital of the United States. As I see it, my job is to kind of explain the historical roots of abortion here in New York and what's before the legislature now. And so if you kind of understand how it happened here, you'll realize, as I'm sure you all know, but maybe make other people realize too, that we have to be aware, alert, and persistent. Now, with respect to the abortion law, Governor Cuomo's proposed expansion of the abortion law, he's been after this for quite a while, and we were successful a few years ago by one vote in the Senate. We were successful. Probably everyone in this room did something to encourage the Senate to do what we believe is the right thing. But we can't rest on our laurels. If we think we've won this because we won before, we could be in for a rude and heartbreaking awakening. So how did abortion happen here in New York State? Again, it was 1970. I happened to be at that time a high school student. I was a junior in high school, and when I wasn't painting bridges, I worked in the legislature. And I worked for Assemblyman George Michaels. You'll hear more about him in a moment. I was one of his legislative aides. And the change that happened because of him and others, the change that happened was so big that after the abortion law was passed in New York State, 60% of the women having abortions in New York were coming in from out of state. It was that big a change. And it happened very quickly and in a very radical way, and it took people by surprise. So this can't take us by surprise. We have to be prepared. I got this information when I was asked to speak last week and this week from the New York Times, an article that appeared in the year 2000. It was kind of to commemorate the 30th anniversary then of the passage of the law. And I have to say, they put both viewpoints in there, the people who opposed the bill as well as those who supported it. It wasn't a celebration piece. It was kind of an informative piece. And it pointed out that in the early 1960s, there were many efforts to do this, but they got nowhere. They got nowhere in New York. Assemblyman Percy Sutton of Manhattan introduced the first bill and it didn't go anywhere. In 1967, it failed. In 1968, it failed. In 1969, it failed. And the Assembly was defeating these bills. Before 1970, the Senate Majority Leader, who was then Earl Bridges, he would not allow a vote in his House, in the Senate. And remember, at the time the abortion bill was passed, we had a Republican governor, Nelson Rockefeller, we had a Republican Senate, and we had a Republican Assembly. And John Markey, the sainted late senator from Staten Island, wonderful senator, he's quoted in this Times article as saying that there was nothing about this that worried them in the late 60s, before the bill passed, actually, in 1970. There was a constitutional convention in 1967. I remember my mother was a secretary at it. And there wasn't a single bill at the constitutional convention that was proposing that this even be considered in the New York State Constitution. And he says, Markey said, there was no advocacy about it whatsoever in the late 60s, except for these bills that people weren't paying any attention to. However, some people were planning, and some people were paying attention. There's a person quoted in the article named Lawrence Lader. He was then chairman of what was called the National Association for Repeal of Abortion Laws. That's the first NARAL acronym. And in February 1969, he said they had a meeting in Chicago. And they planned. They were playing chess then. They were planning their next moves. And they said at this meeting in Chicago in 1969, let's focus on New York State. Let's get this done in New York State because people will really pay attention, and then other states will follow New York. So that was a strategy that they had. A very good friend of mine is also quoted in this article, Mike Long. He and I have known each other for many years, chairman of the New York State Conservative Party. And he says in the article, abortion was a non-issue up till then. He says, nobody, and I mean nobody, expected this to become a reality. Warren Anderson, who ended up succeeding Earl Bridges as the Senate Majority Leader, he said there wasn't all that much lobbying on it. He said there was no lobbying against it. Mike Long said they didn't have any idea, any notion that it was going to pass. He said it took the church by surprise. The main focus then of the lobbying effort for the church at that time was aid to parochial schools, aid to private schools. And Lader's quoted, the NARAL guy from Chicago, the planner, he was happy that that's what the church was focusing on. He said, focus on the aid to the schools. We're going to do this other thing. And then Markey says in the piece that Earl Bridges, the Senate Majority Leader, nobody knew why he did it, but he let the bill go to the floor. He let it go to the floor of the Senate. And this is why you heard somebody say earlier today, focus on the leadership. You have to focus on the leadership, of course. Senate Majority Leader, you have to focus on every senator who's ever voted pro-life. You have to make sure they continue to, because as you're going to hear here, the slightest little change, and it's all over. And then, how are you going to reverse it? Try, you can try, but it's very hard. Once the toothpaste's out of the tube, it's hard to put it back in. So Markey says, he didn't think it's going to, but then they're on the Senate floor and they have the roll call. And he was flabbergasted. He said he was actually in disbelief. So it passed the Senate, where they thought it would never pass. At the time, the Assembly had a terrible bill. No restrictions whatsoever. Anytime, anywhere, any kind of abortion you want. And so when it passed the Senate, they figured, well, we got to do something a little bit in the Assembly. So they put in the bill that became the law that you actually have here in New York. Unrestricted abortion up to 24 weeks, and after that, only to save the life of the mother when you say you can't have one, all right? And that was the bill that was before the Assembly when my boss, as I said, I was a clerk in the legislature, and he was my boss. I'm sitting up there in the gallery. And he's George Michaels, World War II Marine hero, representing a very Catholic district in the western central part of the state. He votes no, like he promised he would. He voted no. So now the vote's over, and they're about to bang it done, and it's 74 to 74. It means it's not going to make it, okay? What a relief, not going to make it. But yours truly, your speaker here, had a message for him that his son called, okay? A message that his son called. And so he calls his son, and then he comes back, and he says, Mr. Speaker, one of my sons just called me a whore for the vote I cast against this. And he changed his vote. And that's how it happened. That's how it happened. So now, instead of being a tie, we lose. We lose by one vote. And in 1972, the legislature voted to repeal the 70 law. You think, oh, that's great, but Rockefeller vetoed it. So again, once something happens, it's very, very hard to overturn it. I mean, you really need the parting of the sea in order to do that. I mean, that kind of miracle, once it already happens. So let's all do our very best to make sure it doesn't happen, because we already have it bad, but let's not make it worse. And I'm going to tell you how worse it's going to be in just a moment. Another person's quoted in that article, a former colleague of mine, the late Barbara Shack. As Alan mentioned, I'm on the Governor's Task Force on Life and the Law, Governor Pataki appointed in 1997. Barbara Shack was one of the original appointees of Mario Cuomo when he founded the task force in 1985. And she was with, at the time of the abortion bill, 1970, she was with the Civil Liberties Union. And she says, quote, "This was absolutely the most important thing I ever did. We knew that nothing would ever be the same again. We knew that we were changing the world," close quote. And you know, we all disagree, but she did change the world. They did. And they did it with a plan and with persistent advocacy. I mean, they never let grass grow under their feet. They just kept going and going and going. And so I know all of you feel that way, and I know all of you have been in this for a really long time, but we have more work, and I'm about to tell you what it is here with respect to what we face now. And I only have a little bit of time. There's a lot of information out there. I recommend that you check out the New York State Catholic Conference website. They have a wealth of information, some terrific information there. So what we have now, pending in Albany, a bill that's already passed the Assembly, right? Passed the Assembly, and it's in the Senate. So, got to work hard there in the Senate, folks. It's Senate Bill 2796 by Senator Kruger. This is a dangerous and extreme expansion of abortion policy in New York State. The governor has announced his intention to submit an amendment to the state constitution to accomplish the same thing. Let's focus on this particular law that could pass if we're not careful. It would expand late-term abortion and endanger women and infants in our state. There are 6 points to it, so we'll go through all 6. Okay, first, it's an expansion of late-term abortion. Currently, abortions are legal through the 24 weeks, the first 24 weeks of pregnancy, but they're outlawed after that unless necessary to save a woman's life. This bill would repeal the penal law references to abortion and insert a health exception into the public health law. And we all know that the health exception is so broadly interpreted, it could be anything, okay, including psychological health. So it's a reason for any abortion anytime. We would have abortion at any time for any reason, including into the 9th month. It would encourage more late-term abortionists to come to New York, and it would lead to more third trimester abortions in New York State. It would allow the abortionist to determine the fetal viability of an unborn child. The person could say, well, I don't think this fetus is viable at 24 weeks, 29 weeks, 32 weeks. It will certainly result in viable unborn children being aborted. Second, it would empower non-doctors to perform abortions. It would empower non-doctors to perform abortions. Current New York State statutes and regulations require only licensed physicians to perform abortions. This law says any healthcare practitioner, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurse midwives can perform abortions, as long as the education department authorizes these non-doctors to perform chemical and surgical abortions. The goal of abortion advocates is to replenish the declining numbers of doctors who are willing to perform abortions. Numbers going down, and they want these abortions to continue, so they want non-doctors to be licensed to do it. This is dangerous for women and for infants. Third, it could compel participation in abortion. If abortion is ordained to be a fundamental right, that could supersede even your right to conscience. So if it's a fundamental right to have an abortion, you could be said to be discriminating against this fundamental right. If you're a doctor who refuses to be involved, you could risk losing your license. Hospitals could risk losing their licenses. Medical facilities, even religious ones, could risk losing licenses. If you don't allow abortions, you could risk fines. You could lose funding. You could lose operational certificates. Health insurance plans could be forced to cover abortions, and employees could be forced to purchase such coverage. Fourth, it would eliminate protections for pregnant women and their unborn children. Moving from the penal law to the public health law would be a major policy shift for the statutory framework for abortion coverage in this state. Violent attacks against pregnant women and their children, their unborn children, which happens with some frequency in cases of domestic violence, would no longer be subject to the criminal penalty. It would remove all current penal law protections for pregnant women in cases of illegal or unwanted abortions. So you have domestic violence, you have harm done to the woman, right now it's a crime. It would move it away from that. Fifth, it would jeopardize live born children resulting from abortions. It would repeal public health law section 4164, part of which gives full legal protection to any child who might mistakenly be born alive as a result of an abortion. That law currently also requires a second doctor to be available during a late-term abortion to help give medical care to any such child. We remember reading about Philadelphia abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell in 2013, who's serving a life sentence for murdering 3 infants. This was done by cutting their spinal cords. This kind of stuff has happened throughout the country. Here in New York, I remember in 1991, the papers revealed that Ana Rosa Rodriguez was born with one arm because Dr. Abu Ayat had removed the other arm during a failed abortion. This stuff happens, and currently the law is supposed to protect these children who survive the abortions, but this would change that. They'll be left to die of neglect, and of course, we read about the revelations of the transfer of fetal tissue for researchers. This would, of course, encourage that. 6, it will increase the state's abortion rate. We always like to look at something that's positive. The abortion numbers have been going down in recent years in New York. If successful, this law could turn it around and make them go back up. And we have the paradox that in one unit of your hospital, where heroic actions are being taken to save the lives of wanted, prematurely delivered, viable infants, another unit down the hall could be destroying those same humans who are the same age. This is similar, this proposed law is similar to the failed 10th plank of the law that was before the legislature in 2013, 14, 15, the Women's Equality Agenda. This is simply not, it's not a simple update to the law. It's a bold and dangerous expansion of current law and would go beyond Roe versus Wade. And then there's another law that's before the legislature, and this is for legalizing physician-assisted suicide. Again, there's a lot of information. I invite your attention to the New York State Catholic Conference website. There's a load of information for you there. This has not passed the Assembly. There has been a coalition in Albany of people, traditional pro-life people who you see advocating on the abortion issue, as well as people who are supporting people with disabilities. They're very, very worried about this bill, people with disabilities. And so it's Assembly Bill 2383 of Paulin and Senate Bill 3151 of Savino. This would add a new section to the public health law to allow physicians to prescribe lethal doses of medication for the express purpose of ending a person's life. Legalizing physician-assisted suicide in New York would blur the long-standing distinctions between withdrawing extraordinary medical assistance and taking active steps to destroy human life. Withdrawing extraordinary medical assistance removes burdensome or useless treatments and allows nature to take its course. allowing the patient to live or die according to God's will. But deliberately destroying the human life, that's very different. It's deliberately acting to make the patient dead. It would forever alter the doctor-patient relationship here in New York. Patients are best served when medical professionals provide support and care with dignity and respect, not with lethal doses of drugs. The American Medical Association is holding a strong policy position against physician-assisted suicide. They say, quote, "It is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role, and that it would be difficult or impossible to control." Amen. Now, if this were to pass, it would lead to psychological, financial, and other pressures for vulnerable persons to end their lives. And that's particularly important in today's era of healthcare rationing and cost cutting. You hear the way people talk, "I don't want to be a burden to my family." You know, I will tell you, all the years that I spent with my mother through this, they were wonderful years, and they were wonderful years for the families of the others who were visiting with their mothers and fathers during this time. You know, they were not a burden. They were helping us till they took their last breaths. The task force that I sit on, that Governor Mario Cuomo, founded in the 80s, in 1994, 3 years before I joined it, took up this very issue, physician-assisted suicide. It's not on our plate right now, but they took it up in 1994, and they were unanimously against it, saying, quote, "No matter how carefully any guidelines are framed, assisted suicide and euthanasia will be practiced through the prism of social inequality and bias that characterizes the delivery of services in all segments of society, including healthcare. The practices will pose the greatest risks to those who are poor, elderly, members of minority groups, or those without access to good medical care. The growing concern about healthcare costs increases the risks. This cost consciousness will not be diminished and may well be exacerbated by healthcare reform." Close quote. So, there are many fatal flaws for this proposed legislation. And those who tell you there are safeguards, it just ain't so. It does not require screening, testing, or treatment for clinical depression. It requires a physician to falsify the death certificate to list the underlying illness as the cause of death, not the suicide. It encourages insurance fraud by allowing beneficiaries to collect benefits following a suicide. It allows non-New York State residents to access physician-assisted suicide here in New York, and it contains absolutely no safeguards against coercion or abuse once the lethal drugs are in the patient's possession. Our government should be consistent in its efforts to prevent suicide. It is illogical for the state to promote and facilitate. If I take my glasses off, maybe I'll get it. It is illogical and inconsistent for the state to promote and facilitate suicide for one group of persons while recognizing that suicide is a serious statewide problem for others. We have to urge the state to improve access to palliative care and hospice care. There has to be improved education and training of physicians in pain management. There has to be appropriate diagnosis for treatment of depression. As was said by others earlier, this is on the way. We do have allies here. We have more allies than we do on the abortion fight. But again, as I noted in 1970, no one thought that was going to pass the abortion law then, so let's make sure we're not asleep here. Now, how do we go about persuading? I suggest, with respect to all of these issues, both of these issues, firstly, you master the 6 points we talked about on the abortion expansion and the several points I mentioned on physician-assisted suicide. And again, I invite your attention to the resources. Loads of resources here and certainly on the websites. Now, I've been involved, Alan mentioned I'm an attorney, a practicing attorney in New York, have been 38 years. And I've been involved in these discussions both there to speak and you're going to be with people that don't agree with you. It used to be, when I would do this, I would take the lawyer's approach. I try cases, I argue appeals in court and so forth, and what you do is you marshal your evidence. You say, well, do you realize this. And I used to think, the reason that people are for abortion is they really don't know what it is. If I just politely and professionally explain it, I will persuade them. And I used to get dull stares or, frankly, how shall I say, just refusal to engage. The dull stare was because you can't be right. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but this can't happen, right? And the other, the stern resistance, these folks, they know what it is, but they're just fine with it. Barbara Boxer, the former senator from California, you remember when our beloved Rick Santorum was senator from Pennsylvania, they had a debate on the floor of the Senate on partial birth abortion ban. And to his credit, Senator Santorum, he's up there, imagine this kind of thing on the United States floor of the Senate, floor of the United States Senate. It's not easy. And so she was his opponent in the debate. And of course, as you know, with partial birth abortion, rather than the normal delivery of the child, head first, which is the normal way, the doctor turns the baby around, so the delivery is, most of the delivery is feet first, and then Santorum said to Boxer, well now, is there any point where you're going to say no to this? She said, no, fine. He said, well, what happens if? What happens if, when the doctor's doing this, turning and mostly delivery, the baby slips out? Okay? He doesn't do what he's trying to do while just a little bit of the baby's still left in utero. What are you going to do if baby slips out? She doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to talk. Finally, he pinned her down. This is important for you to know here when you're talking to people who don't agree with you. They're not going to. He said, well, is there any time post-birth when you can say, agree with me that you shouldn't have the termination of this new life? And her answer was, it's on the record, when the mother takes the child home from the hospital. That's what she said. So I tell you that not to get you riled up, right? But these are the folks that, there are some people who just don't know and maybe they don't want to know. These folks know. They really do know, and they don't agree, and they're determined, okay? So we just have to know and make other people aware and persuade. So again, I used to marshal all this, and I'd be having discussions. Now what I do, I was going to an event in Manhattan in 1999. Then Governor Bush of Texas was speaking at the Sheraton. I was going in, it was after work, I was dressed like this, and ABC News cameras were outside. And so they see me going in, they assumed the way I was dressed, I was going in to see Bush. Not personally, there were a lot of people there to see him, okay? And so they are you here to see Governor Bush? I said, yes, I am. He said, well, why do you like him? And I said, well, he and I have the same views on important issues. They said, well, such as? I said, well, in today's society, families are faced with many different crises. And we both believe in non-violent solutions to those crises. And the guy, the camera, they got the light on and everything. He goes, what? And I said, well, there are lots of crises, there are all kinds of things happening in a household. And one crisis is an unplanned pregnancy. And we believe in non-violent solutions. Turn it off, he says to the guy. and so when now I'm engaged now, firstly, nobody wants to be for violence. They may be all pro-choice, whatever, but nobody says I'm for violence, all right? So I just say, well, my personal view on this is I prefer non-violent solutions to family crises, including this one, okay? And usually we're off to something more substantive. And then they say sometimes, well, yeah, but of this issue, then once they're born, they're thrown to the wolves. And well, no. And those here in this room know this very, very well. This is why it's nice to speak with people like this in this room. Well, we have schools, and we have things like Inner City Scholarship Fund, and we have homes for women who now, and the Sisters of Life are here, God bless, and they and others have homes for women who are now faced with this problem because the child has been born, they don't have any money, any place to live. And we take care of those people, and then we have schools, and then we have health care, and then we have tremendous end-of-life opportunities for people to serve. I served for years as a director of nursing homes, all kinds of things. And so, we don't have to say that's just our issue. We're taking care of people from the moment they're conceived until the moment God calls them home, okay? And again, another thing that I find in the debates, if you will, I always, to the extent I can, I try to use the words, Reagan used to do this a lot, I try to use the words of people who are revered by people on the other side, all right? So, and it's up front, okay? There's nothing sneaky about it, I think it's right there. So when they say, well, what do you think about Roe v. Wade? What do you think about that? You're at an event or something. I said, well, there's more than one decision in the Roe v. Wade case, and I prefer the decision of Justice Byron White, who was appointed by President John F. Kennedy. I think Kennedy's appointee, Byron White, he got it right. I think Nixon's appointee, Harry Blackmun, got it wrong with his opinion, okay? Now, in the New York area, how many people that you're going to deal with are pro-Nixon people in the New York area, right? They all left Kennedy, right? And Nixon, so I said, well, in my personal view, White had it right. And what White said was, and it's his dissent, joined by Rehnquist, at the heart of the controversy in these cases are those recurring pregnancies that pose no danger whatsoever to the life or health of the mother, but are nevertheless unwanted for any one or more of a variety of reasons: convenience, family planning, economics, dislike of children, the embarrassment of illegitimacy, etc. The common claim before us is that for any one of such reasons, or for no reason at all, and without asserting or claiming any threat to life or health, any woman is entitled to an abortion at her request if she is able to find a medical advisor willing to undertake the procedure. That's what White said, Kennedy's appointee. Chief Justice Berger, another Nixon appointee, in his concurrence, he said, no, the dissent is wrong. This certainly isn't abortion on demand. Well, he was wrong and White was right, okay? And I happened to be at a conference, Second Circuit Judicial Conference, and the late Justice Scalia was speaking, and he had a good wit, and he said, later in his life, Warren Burger thought he actually voted against Roe versus Wade. This is why I'm telling you, it's so important to have people realize what's going on. I'll tell you one other anecdote. Recently, I just read, Hadley Arcus wrote, maybe some of you have seen it, that Potter Stewart, who was a Republican on the court at the time, he was part of the majority for Roe versus Wade, and he had a buddy, Senator James Buckley, our senator from New York at the time. And right after the decision, there's a dinner party in Georgetown, and they happened to be sitting next to each other. They were pals from Yale. And Buckley gave him a ton of grief for participating in this majority decision on Roe versus Wade. And he said, well, no. And I said, well, do you realize what is involved? And he started, at this dinner with these people, the senator lays out what's happening to an unborn child, development, and then the abortion and so forth. And Stewart was astonished. He said, no, it can't be. He goes, I got this from the briefs that you obviously didn't read. These are the briefs that were before the court from the people in Texas. So anyway, you have to pay very close attention and don't assume that that the other people that you're trying to persuade are paying close attention. You have to try to persuade them, but always in a professional way. And you know this, again, another thing to say which people find surprising, Roe versus Wade, they say, well, it's the law of the land, it's the Constitution, it's the United States Constitution. That was decided January 1973. That right did not exist according to the Supreme Court in April 1971. In April 1971, the United States Supreme Court decided a case called United States versus Voitch, V-U-I-T-C-H. If you want to look it up, 402 U.S. 62, April 21, 1971. Mylan Voitch was a licensed physician who was indicted in federal court in Washington, D.C. for performing abortions in violation of the District of Columbia Code. The district judge dismissed the indictments on the ground that the District of Columbia abortion law was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in an opinion by Justice Black, held that the abortion law was not unconstitutionally vague. only one of the 9 Supreme Court justices, William O. Douglas, who was a staunch abortion proponent, only one dissented from that holding. So here you have a doctor, he's indicted. The district court judge says that's unconstitutional. 8 out of the 9 said no, it's constitutional. Douglas in dissent said that abortion touches intimate affairs of the family, of marriage, of sex, which in Griswold versus Connecticut, that was a contraception case, we held to involve rights associated with several express constitutional rights, which are summed up in the right of privacy. And he wrote that Dr. Voigt's indictments should be dismissed. So the justices who in 21 months later authored, the justices who 21 months later found that there is a right in 1971 said no. And who wrote it? Blackmun in 1973, and he actually did not join in the dissent of Douglas at all then. So this right came about in a 2-year period of time. In fact, he had a separate opinion that joined with Black. So privacy, of course, in those days was supposed to come from the First Amendment, right? You have a right to privacy. It didn't say it. The First Amendment does say you have a right to freedom of speech, correct? But maybe not if you're on a college campus today. And the First Amendment also says that you have a right to freedom of religion, correct? But if you're the Little Sisters of the Poor, maybe you have to buy abortifacients, right? So anyway, privacy is very important to some, but the other aspects of the First Amendment, not so much. So another thing, after noting that Justice White was the real hero there, President Kennedy's appointee on the Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton decisions, I also will point out, if I'm discussing this with people, that President Kennedy's sister, Eunice, was pro-life. She supported pro-life causes. And that before he wanted to become president, his brother, Senator Ted Kennedy, wrote in 1971, this is Ted Kennedy, "While the deep concern of a woman bearing an unwanted child merits consideration and sympathy, it is my personal feeling that the legalization of abortion on demand is not in accordance with the value which our civilization places on human life. Wanted or unwanted, I believe that human life, even at its earliest stages, has certain rights which must be recognized. The right to be born, the right to love, the right to grow old. I share the confidence of those who feel that America is working to care for its unwanted as well as wanted children, protecting particularly those who cannot protect themselves. I also share the opinions of those who do not accept abortion as a response to our society's problems, an inadequate welfare system, unsatisfactory job training programs, and insufficient financial support for all its citizens. When history looks back to this era, it should recognize this generation as one which cared about human beings enough to halt the practice of war, to provide a decent living for every family, and to fulfill its responsibility to its children from the very moment of conception." That was Ted Kennedy. Okay? And then Jesse Jackson, before he wanted to be president, in 1977, he wrote, "There are those who argue that the right to privacy is of a higher order than the right to life. That was the premise of slavery. You could not protest the existence or treatment of slaves on the plantation because that was private and therefore outside your right to be concerned. What happens to the mind of a person and the moral fabric of a nation that accepts the aborting of the life of a baby without a pang of conscience? What kind of person and what kind of society will we have 20 years hence if life can be taken so casually? It is that question, the question of our attitude, our value system, and our mindset with regard to the nature and worth of life itself that is the central question confronting mankind. Failure to answer that question affirmatively may leave us with a hell right here on earth." People sometimes also say, well, you know, John, this is all nice and easy for you to say, but you're not a woman, it's not your issue. Okay? They do. They say that, and I'm not a woman. But the fact is that the vast majority worldwide of unborn children who have their lives taken are not men. All right? They're little girls. Way back in 1992, Ms. Magazine stated that the vast majority in the third world, in China and India and in the third world, were females, okay? And also, I point out that the organizations that are very, very active throughout the country in the pro-life movement, they're headed by women, okay? 156 years ago, last Saturday, April 22nd, 1864, Congress approved adding "In God We Trust" to our money. The country was most divided at that time. It was the last full year of the Civil War. It's divided now as well, not that badly, but it is divided. Let's, all of us here, do what we can, everything we can, to learn all that we can, and persuade all that we can, as we always recall that we are all, each of us, God's children, and that He'll help us if we honor Him and seek to do the work that He wants us to do. There was another challenging time in our nation. We've had many challenging times. At the very beginning of our nation, in 1787, the Constitutional Convention had been convened. And at the convention, Benjamin Franklin said, "And have we forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this building no better as we build a political structure than the builders of Babel. The founders of this nation recognized in the Declaration of Independence a person's inalienable right to life. Let us pray that our country and our state will once again regard that truth as self-evident. As I said, I'm a boy from Albany. I do remember where I was on January 20th, 1961. I was homesick that day. I remember because I was 7. It was President Kennedy's inauguration. And my mother said, "You ought to watch this," okay? And I remember it was a very inspiring speech, and I didn't memorize it at the time, but I've heard it enough to know that he finished the speech by saying, "Let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking for His grace and His blessing, recognizing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." Thank you very much.
The whereas people left a little something. You can open it.